Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to a strategy session focused on raising the bar for educator prep programs. My name is Kira Orange Jones, and I'm honored to serve as your moderator to this esteemed panel. And today we are going to really be focused on two essential questions. The first is, are EPPs actually ensuring that future educators are actually ready to teach math, reading, and beyond? And the second is, how are states, right, some of our most innovative states, truly raising the bar for EPP programs? We'll hear from some of the country's most promising, innovative systems leaders and experts, and really dive in on what is actually working. I want to start by just introducing myself briefly. I started my career right here in Louisiana 25 years ago as a fourth grade teacher through Teach for America. Shout out. And I am now the CEO of TeachPlus, which is a national organization that works to support teachers, some of our country's most outstanding teachers, to take leadership over critical issues of practice and policy to improve student outcomes. I want to say our newest initiative, something called the Center for Inspired Teaching and Exceptional Learning, which is focused on partnering with a incredible, innovative group of talent and academic providers, districts across 8 states and growing, is really focused on uh, working to help reshape the teaching profession in this country so that it is more sustainable, more effective, and better drive student outcomes. It's early and there's several years ahead of hopefully good insights to be learned. But I'm sitting here looking at Brian Hassel, who's one of our incredible partners, and several others. And the thing we know for sure is that uh, you know, regardless of some of the most important components of that program, which we know, whether it's teacher leadership, teaming, prioritizing high quality instructional materials, high quality professional learning, all of the most important components that lead to teachers being able to be effective and deliver on the promises they make every day for students. The one thing that has to be true is ed prep programs have to better ensure our teachers are prepared for day one. So this is a conversation that is very near and dear to my heart and to our organization's heart. And I'm very excited for this rich discussion. I want to start with just brief introductions. We are joined today by Commissioner Susana Cordova, Colorado Department of Education, Director McKenzie Snow, Iowa Department of Education, Heather Peske, National Council on Teacher Quality, and Justine Morina, Senior Policy Director for Teacher and School Policy at ExcelinEd. So with that, let's jump in. The first question I would love to uh, direct towards Director Snow, and it's really focused on your legislative changes to EPPs, right? So Iowa made some broad legislative changes in 2024 and 2025 to its EPP approval process. Can you just talk to us about why now?
Absolutely. Thank you for the question. And I'm so excited to be having this critical conversation about the role teacher prep programs play in our broader system reforms. You've got a handout in front of you. It's double-sided. On the front side, I'm just going to do some landscape setting that focuses on the remarkable results Iowa's been able to deliver. And a strong component of that is ensuring that our teacher prep programs are aligned to evidence-based instruction. So we've seen an 11 percentage point increase in early literacy performance from third to fourth grade in just the past year, 24 to 25. We've seen a significant reduction in chronic absenteeism, 10 percentage points in 3 years. And we've seen that our school improvement system is working with an overall comprehensive school improvement rating score up 5.5 percentage points. And then 8 of our comprehensive schools, our lowest performing Title I schools in the state, have improved 10 percentage points or more. We also have an incredibly strong teacher pipeline that relies upon our teacher prep programs, but also upon multiple pathways to the teaching profession, including the governor's teacher and paraeducator registered apprenticeship program. In Iowa, our vacancy rate is about 1.74% compared to the nation, which averages at about 3%. Um, when you flip the page over, you'll see two comprehensive pieces of legislation that have been enacted over the past 2 years. One, Literacy Changes Lives, is focused on evidence based reading instruction aligned to the science of reading. The other piece of legislation is called the Math Counts Act, focused on evidence based math instruction. And you'll see in what is a very busy handout, a focus on high expectations, so rigorous academic standards and high quality instructional materials, a focus on early identification and progress monitoring, strong intervention structures, and then critically, a focus on both in service and pre service teachers. So we've got our statewide investments in evidence based professional learning, but we also have included in our accreditation standards for teacher preparation programs the components of the science of reading and the components of evidence based math instruction. So, when the Department of Education makes a recommendation to the State Board of Education to accredit or conditionally accredit or not accredit a teacher preparation program, they are doing so based on the alignment of their curriculum to what we know works for kids, what we know is evidence based instruction. And I know many states have endeavored to support evidence based reading and math instruction across multiple components of their education system. And I just think a main takeaway should be to ensure that those efforts include the alignment of your teacher preparation programs to what we know works for students.
Thank you for that. I do have a follow-up, which is about just tell us a little bit about how implementation is actually going.
Absolutely. So there are multiple components to ensure successful implementation, and we see accreditation like accountability. And we know when we talk about K-12 school accountability, the purpose of accountability is support. It's to inform continuous school improvement. Likewise, the purpose of accountability for teacher preparation programs is to support continuous improvement. So we started with ensuring that we supported curriculum reviews for our teacher preparation programs. We worked with them to establish self assessment workbooks so you could essentially map yourself out and see how you would likely perform on those accreditation standards. We've got targeted professional learning for our teacher preparation programs, specific conferences for them, peer learning communities, and more. We also ensure that we rely on survey data, both survey data of their program completers and of who hires those program completers, our Iowa schools and school districts. So all of those components inform and support their alignment to these rigorous accreditation standards that ensure every single teacher, day one, is prepared to provide evidence based instruction.
Thank you for that. So, Commissioner Cordova, I'd love to come to you next. So, I know that Colorado for some time has been making steady changes to its EPP accreditation process. Take us into the history. How's it going now?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. And thank you for the opportunity to be here. And I'm going to tell a little bit of a story because I think it's really helpful to the context in Colorado. I started my career in the central office in the Denver Public Schools as the director of literacy and was brought in the early 2000s, very much in a balanced literacy environment where everybody was trained in balanced literacy. We had Lucy Calkins units. We did a very much readers, writers workshop model approach. And I think Denver was in many ways very emblematic of the movement around balanced literacy. And so as the science of reading work started becoming more and more evident, I'll just name like my own experience with that was very much, I think, like many, many, many educators, a lot of resistance, a lot of like, I wanna know more about what you're talking about. Lots of concerns in my own personal experience around the work with English learners. And I tell that story by way of saying I think part of what we have had to do in Colorado is work on both the legislative agenda, work on what support looks like, work on what it means from the state agency to set expectations, the role of the board in overseeing our educator prep programs, and then really firm positioning around what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. And I think it's really important to like name my own experience with that because had I still been in a district while this was going into effect, I very, very much would have been on the resistance side. And what we've had to do, you go back to 2016, that's when we first adopted science reading standards. Um, we spent some time largely with very little movement. And in 2018 was when we first started really doing deep dives into the curriculum and educator prep programs and introduced the same concept of conditional authorization, which wasn't in legislation. It was a stance that our board took. And it really wasn't until we said, we're not going to authorize you that we began to open up the lines of conversation with higher ed partners around what conditional authorization meant. We're able to get that passed into legislation, and I really do just have to give tremendous kudos to our state board, both the folks who are currently on the state board and the folks who worked on the state board during this time period, for their intense
Mm.
focus on what the research says, what the evidence says, and what it means to oversee educator prep. And so this concept of conditional authorization really led to, I think, some soul searching on the part of some of our providers, particularly our smaller providers who realized that they did not have the depth of knowledge and
Mm.
capacity to run programs that aligned with the standards and decided that they weren't going to provide licensure in elementary literacy in particular. And then it also led to conversations around, you know, um, if these are the state's standards, no, this isn't a question of academic freedom. This is a question of like, are we meeting the standards? And what's the role of the state board in authorizing programs to be able to say that you are preparing educators who understand these standards and can start? And to be really clear, it's the first step for teachers. You think about the work that teachers do in their preparation. There's so much more work that needs to go into place when they're in the classroom, and so I think it's really just part of what we have to do. And so that um, that time period from 2016, 2018, when we started talking about conditional authorization, 2020, when the legislation went into effect for conditional authorization, and then sort of like the side by side working with people, any program that is conditionally authorized must be addressed live in a state board meeting. And so these are like not consent agenda items. These are where our staff is presenting to the board is asking questions.
Mm.
The time frame for conditional authorization is always part of the dialogue. The areas of improvement or lack of improvement is part of the conversation. And so I do think it has been this continual evolution of what does it mean to ensure that our teachers have the opportunity to learn the most up to date research and to make sure that we are both holding people accountable in the prep programs, but supporting them when they're not yet there.
That's incredible. Just a quick follow-up. Can you speak a little bit to the improvements? So, what are you seeing? What are you most proud of related to this?
Sure, yeah. So I would say that there, and it's never, just one thing that is at play, but between the work that we've done around educator prep and then the work that we're doing with our in-service teachers, with the Colorado Read Act, requirements for training for in-service teachers, frankly, a lot of the requirements are around our school leaders. We are seeing year over year gains. We had a tremendous drop during COVID, but we are beginning to see that bounce back. And, 2, 3 points a year statewide, multiple years since the school closures during COVID. And so,
That's great.
not nearly as fast as we want it to be, but definitely going in the right direction.
That's great. Heather, I would love to come to you next. So I know NCTQ has taken on ratings for EPPs focused on the quality of math and reading instruction and also rating the quality of state policy to actually kind of raise the bar for EPPs. Can you speak to what types of what you've learned, what kind of guidance you provide?
Sure.
teachers.
First,
Yeah.
thank you so much, Kira, and thanks to ExcelinEd for inviting me. It's great to be back in Louisiana. I started teaching here as a fourth grade teacher in Baton Rouge, so close to New Orleans, as a Teach for America teacher many, many years ago. So it's lovely to be back, and I appreciate the invitation.
Hmm.
In regards to what state policymakers should be doing related to improving student outcomes by improving the preparation of their teachers, we advise three things. The first is to set specific, detailed standards about what teacher preparation programs should teach their future teachers, both in terms of knowledge and skills, and these should be discipline specific. So, for example, you need to say in your regulations or in your law, teacher preparation programs in my state need to ensure that teachers know how to teach reading aligned to the science, and here's what that means. So that's the first thing, is set specific and detailed standards. The second is related to what Director Snow and Commissioner Cordova described, and that is hold the programs accountable for meeting the standards that you just set. I loved the line that you said about accreditation is accountability in the higher ed side. Do not give up that authority that you have to review the programs and hold them accountable. Don't cede it. And at lunchtime, I sat next to a gentleman who's from another state, and he said that his teacher prep programs in his state don't like producing the data that they've been by law required to produce. And he was like, "What should I do about that, Heather?" And I thought, this is kind of astonishing, because if you don't review your programs and approve them, then they don't get to give licenses to the candidates in their programs. And that matters immensely. So the third thing that you need to do is ensure that the licensure tests that are in place are aligned to the research, and that they're high quality, and that you require people to take those tests and require them to pass them. And I'm going to show you a little bit later. We've reviewed all the reading and math licensure tests that are on the market. You can go to nctq.org to see, how did my state's licensure test fare?
Hmm.
And I'll talk a little bit more about those findings. But to wit, in this question about rating and evaluating teacher prep programs, NCTQ has looked at over 700 elementary teacher prep programs and asked the question, to what extent are they aligning with the science of reading? To what extent are they preparing future teachers to teach reading aligned to the best of our science? We've done something similar on the math side. We looked at 1,100 elementary math programs and said, to what extent are elementary teachers getting the content knowledge they need to be able to teach reading aligned to the best research we have? And I'm just going to give you two data points. I have to put on my glasses to do that. First, and this was in 2023 for the evaluation of reading, we found that only 28% of teacher prep programs adequately address all 5 core reading components. So only 28%. But even more concerning is that 22%, 1 in 5 prep programs, did not adequately address any of the 5 core components of the science of reading. Let you sit with that. In math, we know that far too many programs are failing to give aspiring teachers the content knowledge that they need to be effective in math. And so we saw that only 16% of undergrad programs and only 2% of graduate programs earned an A or an A plus on our latest teacher prep review. And you can go and find what we see in terms of our ratings by program and by your state. And the final thing I'll say on this, and then I'll hand it back to you, Kira, is that some of your programs have refused to submit their materials to us for review, describing this as academic freedom. If you are allowing your programs to give licenses to teachers who then go into classrooms and teach my children,
Hmm.
then you need to do something about the quality of the program that they're offering to teachers. And finally, for those of you who say that you have teacher shortages, a lot of the reasons that your teachers leave is they get into classrooms, they don't know what they're doing, and they're not successful with kids. And so then they leave. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Heather. Okay, Justine, I want to come to you next. This is really about the policy, the model policy that ExcelinEd has begun to really recommend to states as a means of bolstering transparency and just being incredibly just clear about the state of things. Can you speak to the report cards?
Yeah, I think it picks up right where Heather was going to, right? So, how do we make sure that as the public consumers, stakeholders, we know how our EPPs are all performing? So, a lot like a consumer report review, where I've gone in a lot recently. You might notice I'm expecting, and I can go see absolutely every piece of equipment that I want to get for my newborn child on safety, on how is it going to perform, what are the materials used. It's that type of level of specificity that we're looking at for EPPs, and so there's three really big things from it. So one is boosting transparency around how are these EPPs performing, aligning to the questions that Heather was asking. So is each EPP ensuring that the candidates are prepared for the classroom? Like those candidates are prepared for the classroom on day one. So it's kind of highlighting that at the program level. So not just the overall school, but you're drilling down on saying, okay, special education, literacy, math. We're looking at each individual program and the graduates from that. How are they doing when they're in the classroom? The second thing is it's really centering the conversation on the outcomes. So we talked earlier, Emily talked about how we need to be measuring what matters. We need to be focusing on the outcomes. We need these report cards and our stakeholders to be focusing on how are EPPs ensuring that the candidates are prepared for the classroom and also how are they doing once they're in the classroom. And so kind of really shaping that focus around these EPPs need to be driving results for students. And third is what I think a lot of us been saying too is that these report cards act as accountability and improvement tools. So a lot of the or a lot of the reviews that we have of programs accreditation or approval, they happen on multi-year cycles, maybe every 4 to 6 years. A report card would come out annually, would be showing key metrics that we want to be looking at for EPPs, and that can actually drive results. So again, data is just data until we actually take action on it. So we need to be having our stakeholders in the room that are actually looking at this data and saying, okay, we're going to initiate a approval process because we're concerned with the data, or we're going to have conversations with our EPPs so that way we can make sure we're supporting them to get the results that we want to see. So it's really a tool that you can use to kind of drive a lot of the actions that my colleagues are talking about.
Thank you. And thank you to ExcelinEd for your leadership on this and any number of other policy issues in this country in terms of support of states. So the next question is really going to be focused on to Director Snow and Commissioner Cordova. And it honestly, you spoke to this a little bit as you kind of shouted out the board. As you know, I sat on the state board here in Louisiana for 12 years and three elected terms. I'm now retired from public life. Um, but one of the things that I actually was on my mind a lot related to EPPs was the collaboration between the SEA and EPPs and how complex that can be. Can you all just speak to what collaboration has looked like, what you found most successful, challenging? Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, I'm happy to take a stab at that. I do think it's really important that we always start with the standards and then the data. And so, one of the things that we've been able to do is publish a dashboard that looks at the results of our educator prep programs. So, it's an educator preparation dashboard. It gives us information on where new teachers get hired and then how they perform based on their evaluations, and we can disaggregate that by the different prep programs. And like to some of the conversation we've had earlier, that's not always an easy conversation with prep programs, but it does give us the opportunity to have an entry point into collaboration conversations where we actually do one-on-ones with prep programs to sit down and like look at the dashboard, look at the data, look at what the results are like, and then begin to talk about, so if you're finding your new educators across multiple districts are struggling in these areas in their evaluations, how is it that we can support you in the work that you're doing with your curriculum to help people in the pre-service stage? And so that's definitely been one of the places. It's been incredibly powerful to have the state board's oversight as a lever for why it matters to have these kind of conversations.
Great. Dr. Snow, I think you're using school satisfaction surveys. Can you speak to that?
We are also using
Yes.
district superintendent and principal feedback about the strengths and opportunities for growth in our teacher prep programs as they observe for new teachers. I do think it's important. This is an obvious statement, but the relationships with your teacher preparation programs matter, and ensuring that you are beginning from a place of I want to help you ensure that you are meeting state accreditation standards. I want to help you ensure that we are realizing the purpose of teacher prep programs, which is to prepare teachers to advance student learning, to advance student achievement and growth. I think you've heard a few times questions around or statements around academic freedom, but getting back to the purpose of teacher prep to prepare highly qualified teachers that positively impact student learning is really critical. Another component I just want to harken back to that Heather mentioned was getting into the weeds of what the accreditation standards say, and it will get to a wonky place, to be sure, but it is really important that you actually define what the science of reading is in your state statute or in your state regulations, because that can also become a buzzword. So it's important to include phonological and phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, uh, comprehension, explicit and systemic instruction, ensuring that there is a prohibition on using 3Qing as a reading instructional strategy. Likewise, with the Math Counts Act, we got really into the weeds of what is evidence based math instruction. We had a Senate committee hearing where we spent 30 minutes discussing what is subitizing, and I knew we were in the right place. So, I would encourage you to learn what those components of evidence-based instruction are and be comfortable ensuring that your Department of Education, your state board of education are responsible for and empowered to holding teacher prep programs accountable to your expectations. And just the last component, NCTQ mentioned reticence to share data. And I think it's really important that state leaders welcome um, and embrace national accountability efforts and then lead state accountability efforts. And we can have a lot of debates about what should be in your teacher prep performance profile. Should you include survey data or not? Should you include student growth percentile for new teachers or not? But it is critical that you are having those conversations about what are appropriate indicators for teacher prep performance profiles.
Thank you. Okay, Heather, I want to come to you. So you laid out some of the challenges, right? Which were grave, right? Can you speak a little bit to when you think about states, other than, of course, the incredible examples we have here that are promising, implementing some promising practices and strategies? What other states are on your radar?
So we try to do this a lot, both a challenge organization as well as a champion organization, meaning we're championing folks who are leading the way, because otherwise people think that it's too paralyzing or they think that the work can't be done. So sometimes you need to dispel myths in your state or nationally by showcasing examples of people and places that are getting the work done. So I just wanted to offer three quickly. The first is Indiana. So in 2023, I think it's 2023. That's right. Yes. Indiana passed a science of reading law. And in that same year previously, we had found that only 33% of Indiana's teacher prep programs adequately covered all five core components of a scientifically based reading and instruction. So just 33%. Well, in the same year, 28% failed to address any of those five core components. So Indiana passed this law in 2023, recognizing the need for urgency. And we were invited, NCTQ was invited by Dr. Jenner and her team to come in and complete reviews of all of their elementary, early childhood, and special education teacher prep programs following this legislative mandate. And so what we found is that in the ensuing years between when we had done our original review with the 28% you heard, what we found is that this year, after having completed our review, we found that 77% of Indiana's programs are now fully aligned to scientifically based reading instruction. So shout out to folks from Indiana for really getting that work done on the teacher prep side. The other two examples that I would cite are right here. One is Iowa, where we reviewed their licensure exams and found that they needed some bolstering. And Director Snow and colleagues moved quickly to do that. So now their reading assessment, that the licensure test is aligned with the standards. Similarly, Commissioner Cordova and folks even who came before her as well really had a lot of courage in order to tell the prep programs, we are not going to authorize you. This conditional approval provision that Commissioner Cordova described is a really significant policy instrument to be able to say to the programs, we're not shutting you down yet. If you improve, we will support you, and that is terrific. If you don't, we're going to continue to hold you accountable. And that's a very difficult proposition to do, particularly when your prep programs serve regions of your state where they may be the only prep program in town. And so we can talk a little bit more about what those innovations look like. When it comes to math and the work on math, we've seen, I'm going to read the list here: Arkansas, Georgia, Kentucky, Louisiana, Maryland, Mississippi, Oklahoma, Oregon, and Utah are states in which the average undergraduate program meets our bar for content that helps teachers learn the content knowledge they need to teach math. So we have some really great examples that this work can get done and that there are folks who are leading the way.
Great. I want to just stay, Heather, with you, Justine, as well, as we get ready to move to questions from our audience. What other recommendations do you have? Do you want to speak to clinical practice, for example, Heather, Justine, anything else?
We're just conferring about who should go first. So we have a bunch of recommendations around clinical practice, or what people call student teaching, not to get all wonky jargony. So there's one data point that I think is really important, and that is if you are assigned to an effective mentor teacher during your student teaching placement, you improve such that the difference between someone who is assigned to not an effective mentor versus someone who is assigned to an effective mentor is that if you're assigned to an effective mentor, you walk into that classroom and you are as effective as a teacher in their third year. So think about that, right? Justine gets assigned to an effective mentor. She is like 2 years ahead of me in terms of her effectiveness when she walks into that classroom. So it's hugely important. And we've done reviews of states and all of your policies around student teaching. And we've highlighted places that are doing really, really interesting work, particularly around this match between the student teacher and the effective mentor teacher. The other recommendation we would have, particularly when it comes to clinical practice, is that it's way too expensive to become a teacher right now. People simply cannot afford to learn to teach. And that is a travesty. And so we need to think about funding student teaching in ways that, like Pennsylvania has just done, for example, where they've issued stipends for student teachers, or folks who are reimagining the roles, this work that Kira described that TeachPlus is doing. They're figuring out how to bring in student teachers in ways that assist the outcomes for kids, give them experience, and also pay them, so that you don't have to be wealthy in order to become a teacher, or you don't have to give up tons of income or take on crippling debt in order to learn to teach. Justine, jump
Yeah, two other things I'd kind of add that we're looking at ExcelinEd. One is just looking, so we're having a huge conversation around the data around our ed prep programs and are they preparing teachers for day one. There's a larger conversation where we're looking at is what is the data of the entire educator workforce, and are our states collecting the data on the supply and demand of teachers? So how many teachers are in these programs? Where areas are they in? Where are the shortages? Do we have alignment between those? Where do we need to make some gaps? And then you can use that information to drive policy. So I can say, okay, I know that we have our highest need shortages in these areas, right? We know they're not across the board. We know that they're focused in certain schools and subjects, so I can use policy to drive that decision. So one area is just working with states to collect data, not just on their ed prep programs, but across the entire educator pipeline. And then the other area, which I think we talked a little bit about too, is once we get a teacher in the door, we need to retain the very best. So we work a lot with states too to think through, okay, what are some strategies that you can use to retain your most effective teachers and then use those strategically. So looking at things like career ladders, mentoring, right? How do we provide additional leadership and compensation to retain those teachers in the classroom, but then ensure that they're teaching a greater number of students and mentoring more of their colleagues? So really looking at this both from how do we make sure we have the data to bring in the great teachers and retain them.
Ooh, Fantastic. So, anyone who has questions, I'm about to open up the floor in just a second. So, be ready. Just one final question for all of our esteemed panelists. We're sitting here in 3 years at a summit, the ExcelinEd summit. What does the future look like? Like, tell us, paint a picture of what is next optimally. What is possible and what is next? Do you want to go first?
I'm happy to start. So, and Susana is, Commissioner Cordova is, I think, about 5 years of implementation in, correct? So, Iowa, in contrast, is 1 to 2 years of implementation in with literacy and with math, with a forthcoming focus also on ensuring our teacher prep programs are strong in preparing educators for high quality classroom management and for differentiation for students with disabilities and students who are English learners. So, early on in implementation, we have been very focused on identifying gaps and supporting voluntary corrective action. That changes as changes are not made, obviously. So we will continue to work closely with teacher prep programs to support their continuous improvement, but we will also be focused on these additional areas of what we know our schools need and most importantly, children need to be successful for brand new teachers.
So last year, our state adopted elementary math standards for the very first time. And so I would say in 3 years, my hope would be that we would see a very similar trajectory around the instruction of math for our elementary school teachers. Something as hard as reading is, I think it's even harder in math for our elementary school educators. So I would hope to see a similar process and approach around supporting EPPs with math.
In the short term of the 3 years, we're going to publish in June a new review of teacher prep programs against the question of how well are they preparing teachers to teach reading. So we are previewing those findings with the ed prep programs right now. We always go back to them and say, this is what we found. This is how we rated you. Is there additional information that you want to give us and that would change our rating of you? So we're in the midst of that right now. So short term, look in June because we'll be rating your programs at that point in time. In the longer term, in the next couple of years, I think we need to do more around setting standards and reviewing prep programs against this question of how well they're preparing candidates to implement high quality instructional materials, because we really need to bring that in as part of a coherent strategy to improve student outcomes by improving teacher capacity. So be on the lookout for all of that work.
I'll do the short term and I'll follow the same model. So short term, we're also really deep diving into this issue and looking at frameworks and more tools that we can use to put out there to support states wanting to work with their ed prep programs to think about accountability and support of them. Long term, I'm thinking a lot about something Governor Bush said this morning, kind of at the end of his speech, where he said, the number one thing he thinks we're ripe for big reform on is how to empower teachers to prepare students for today's needs. And I would take that a step forward to say, how do we make sure that EPPs are part of that conversation to preparing students? So I completely agree. It's high quality instructional materials, but it's everything when we're sitting in sessions today and we're hearing about, okay, what are things we need to do in K-12? It's, okay, how are we bringing our ed preps into that conversation? So we're not just isolating these changes to K-12, but we're teaching our future educators how to make those changes as well. So it's really bringing EPPs into this entire conversation as we talk about what we need to do for students.
All right. I want to open it up. Questions from our audience. Come on up. There's questions. Okay. Yes, go for it.
Those great apps that I have prepped. It's in the creek and bias ever noticed it out eat up here. Think about forest that it really hockey creek in it. The cell on it, not sure it for now.
Happy to. Thanks for the question. There's a quick summary of what I'm going to say on the second sheet. It specifically talks about our long term results in chronic absenteeism and how we've achieved that 10% decline. One component is we had a foundation of an at-risk early warning system that has long been a model for the nation. We engaged a statewide work group. We had statewide professional learning on learner engagement. We had intensive supports for identified schools that were experiencing our highest levels of chronic absenteeism, our comprehensive and targeted schools under our ESSA accountability system. We also very significantly had a piece of state legislation that establishes a continuum of engagement that begins with parent notifications of at risk for chronic absenteeism, then required parent engagement meetings, then required absenteeism prevention plans that look at the root cause of the chronic absenteeism and what interventions and supports are being placed and accountability structures are being put in place to support student attendance. And then ultimately, we continue to strengthen our partnership with our county attorneys across all districts. So it has been a very comprehensive approach that has included administrative actions and really significant legislative actions that had implementation learning curves, but that have ultimately delivered really significant positive results for learners.
Okay, thank you. Come on up because we're recording.
May or may not. I'm at the summer, and I'm up to 29 to go to the higher state. Uh, PA with the house, so I'm the teacher prep, if so the question is that, that them local, but they basically all of the time we got that, but you have a situation where you're trying to get people to, that you're not enough raw materials, but that is, that's why, not enough folks for, we got a bunch of the politics, a lot, part of that.
Working now. I'll take it a little further than that. I'm not going to start off, but we have fewer people wanting to go into education. Turning a college curriculum around is like turning an aircraft carrier, right? Um, you're talking about things that people are going to see. This is going to be harder for me to be a teacher. I'm not sure that's you would tell us that is actually the case. It may actually be easier when you get in the classroom. So, how do we do that and accomplish the task? Because I was here not here last year, we were in Oklahoma City, but the upstream, the IP's book. I mean, you see bodies floating downstream, you keep pulling them out of the river. I feel like that's what we're doing. So, my question to all of you is as a policymaker in Georgia, where we're constitutionally separated from day to day operations of our college, and we have a good chancellor and we work with it. But how do we get that done? Back to what Governor Bush said this morning about you're doing all this, you're spending all this money, you're not getting the reserves. When does that become an emergency? I hear you. We were here last year and we're hearing those things. How do we get it to the people that matter? And that's the folks that have been doing it like this for the last 30 years. At
Thank
the
you.
university system. So
It's great. Thank you. Does anyone want to take that question?
Sure. This is my 36th year in public education, so I've been around the block a couple of times. And I would say that I think everything happens through the combination of accountability and support.
Yeah.
And, we passed accountability expectations in our educator prep program and saw no movement for 2 years. And so, like, you could shut everybody down, that's not gonna help, and so it's, like, the combination, I believe, of, like, honest conversations, real talk about the data, accountability, and support, 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 support.
Yeah. Anybody else? Yeah. Directors, no.
Just the only thing I would add, we all know this, but everybody commits their professional career and much of their lives to education because they want to help children, because they want to advance learner outcomes, learner achievement, learner growth, learner long term outcomes. So I think it's really critical also to start those conversations with the data to demonstrate how this shift, how this alignment to evidence based instruction is going to better realize our shared goal of good things for kids.
Mm.
I would just add, we have to think about policies to improve teacher quality and effectiveness in a really comprehensive way. And so we can't just lower standards in order to get more people to come in. And thankfully, Texas recognized that and just passed incredible legislation,
Yeah.
HB2, and funded it to say we're going to stop putting a bunch of emergency licensed teachers in classrooms because it's bad for kids. So I know that's not easy to do as a policymaker, but it's something we need to do. And second, I would say we have some class sizes that are really tiny. And if we want to pay teachers more to attract them to come into teaching, then we need to confront that elephant in the room, which again is politically unpopular, but could become a way to leverage in improving and increasing teacher salaries and therefore getting more people to come into teaching.
Can I just add
Yeah.
also,
Mm.
you just made me think of it when you talked about like closing down low quality. What are the incentives? One of the things that we do in Colorado, we have a reimbursement fund of up to $10,000 for people who are going through educator prep. Like, I think we need to think about what are the incentives to participate in high quality programs, and particularly, given the cost that people incur, being able to do a high quality alternative licensure program that you can actually get fully funded through the state makes a huge difference, particularly for our rural communities where it is so hard to recruit and retain educators.
That's great. Next question.
It's on.
It's on.
Whew. Hi, Carrie Curto from the Reading League. So I run a community of practice of wonderful faculty that are the lone wolves that really want to drive change in their EPPs. And then we also have an EPP partnership where we won't work with single faculty members. We need to work with the whole program because we see that that's the most effective means of change is to look at the whole program. So my question is that sometimes for these lone wolves, um, deans and EPP leaders can kind of get in the way sometimes, right? They may not understand why it's important to revise their program. And so, are there any initiatives or structures that you know of that are pushing deans and EPP leaders, aside from accountability, which I'm sure a lot of states would love, funding, right? Like Indiana got $111 million from the Lilly Endowment. Are there other structures that you've seen that are working for states that may not have that?
Thanks, Carrie. Who wants to take up?
I can give you the low rent version of what we do. So in Colorado, we do monthly meetings with our deans from our traditional prep programs. We have a monthly meeting with our designated agency leaders for alternative prep programs. We have quarterly updates with all of our EPP providers. We do monthly office hours for our timely hot topics for our leaders and faculty instructors. We have monthly meeting with the Colorado Educator Preparation Advisory Committee. You kind of hear the theme that I'm talking about here. It is like constant,
Yeah.
ongoing outreach and creating that community of learning, so that the support side is equally as impactful as the authorization side.
It's great. I'm going to keep us moving just so everyone gets their questions asked. Yes.
Thank you. I don't think we could be talking about a more important thing. This is a very, excuse me, I'm Billy Hickman. I'm from Georgia, state senator, I'm chairman of education and Senate. I don't think we could be talking about a more important thing today than teachers and teacher prep. This is a critical situation for all of us. We got a cliff. We're heading for a cliff for teachers. We're heading for a cliff for principals, and we're heading for a cliff for superintendents. In Georgia, in December 24, Professional Standards Director Jody Barrow said that we had 5,300 vacancies in Georgia for teachers. In my district, one of my counties, in K through 5, up to about 2 weeks ago, had 5 classrooms that did not have a teacher in the classroom. Excuse me, did not have a degree teacher in the classroom. Had a teacher with just a high school diploma. And we will never have great students if we don't have great teachers. So what we're working on in Georgia right now, we got a Senate Resolution 237. I'm a CPA and accountant, so I said I'm not qualified to figure out why people are not going into education. But let me tell you who is qualified. University System in Georgia is, Technical College System in Georgia is, Student Finance, a bunch of these agencies, they're going to give us a report December 1st as to what we need to do as a legislature to kind of get our arms around this and figure out why people are not getting into education. One of the reasons we're not getting education is that in Georgia, basically, a lot of schools only start teachers out at $44,000 a year. And can you imagine making a salary of $44,000 a year and paying $1,500 a month rent? It doesn't work. So this is a critical issue. I appreciate the panel bringing this to teacher prep is obviously a very, very important part of this, but thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, can I just add one data point to
Yes.
that? So we did analysis of teacher salary increases in the last 5 years compared to increases in housing costs in the last 5 years. On average, across the nation, teacher salaries went up by 24%. That's the good news. What do you think, on average, the percentage increase was for rents? 47% in the last 5 years and 51% to buy a house. So I know that many of you in the room are policymakers and you're working on multiple issues, which is a great opportunity to make a difference when it comes to the quality and the quantity of the teachers that we're recruiting when you can work on these issues simultaneously. So things like, how do you think about making sure that people in your communities can afford housing, and how can you make sure that you're paying teachers so that their wallets aren't shrinking over time?
McKenzie.
It's Thank you. I think it's also really important to situate this conversation in the broader conversation of our strong teacher pipeline, including recruitment, preparation, and retention, and continued preparation and professional learning and training. So that has included in Iowa historic teacher pay raises beginning at $50,000, $62,000 for experienced educators, multiple pathways to licensure, multiple new pathways to endorsement, a grow your own teacher and paraeducator apprenticeship program that has prepared a significant number of special education teachers, our largest vacancy area, the nation's largest vacancy area. I think each state could articulate a comprehensive approach to a strong teacher pipeline, but it's critical to ensure that teacher prep programs are an integral part of that comprehensive solution.
That's great. Julie.
Hi, Julie Gronquist, Teach for America. That actually leads really nicely into my question. In Missouri, we lose about 65% of our teachers, regardless of how they come to the profession within the first 5 years. And one of the things that we are working on is building support for those first couple of years, but that is far from being in statute, let alone funded. So, my question is anybody thinking about, or do you know of states that have actually formalized that kind of bridge from pre-service to in-service, particularly in those first couple of years, thinking about retaining folks during those first few years when we know they're most likely to leave the classroom?
Sure, I'm really proud of our residency program that we've developed in Colorado. And so we have a couple of different pathways for people to become teachers, including students starting in high school with support for bachelor's degrees, residency. So you end after your time as a resident with multiple years experience in the classroom with highly qualified teachers. I think it's a huge game changer. I think it's also a game changer on the housing front because we are not able to recruit people to communities where they can't afford to live, but we certainly can convert people who live in those communities into teachers because they already live there.
That's great. Final question.
Hi, Deborah Helms from TNTP. I really appreciate the naming and explaining of the role of salaries and wages and compensation for educators. I think that's key. I love that we're talking a lot in spaces around bringing industry in to have these conversations about what we're doing to prepare students for industry. And I'd love to see some reciprocal investment from industry to help make sure that there are high wage jobs in education. At the same time, I think the job of teaching has fundamentally changed in a lot of ways, especially over the last 10, 15, 20 years. My kids, when they play school, they don't say, hey, let's step back on the data and think about what, right? Like that's, we still have this concept as a society that is largely that teaching is this sort of creative expression. And I'm wondering where you're thinking about that in relationship to EPPs, like having teachers have to do some level of data literacy work, and then thinking about how we're recruiting, what that means for the pipeline, because there might be a whole group of people that we're missing.
Yeah, I think, I mean, that's kind of where I was going with the conversation earlier, where I think a lot of the change that we're hearing with EPP started with the science of reading when we started saying, okay, if we're focusing all this effort in K-12, let's look at EPPs. But I think the conversation needs to go to, okay, what are the skills that we want our educators to have in the classroom, and are those being taught in our EPP programs? And so that's using things like if you're looking at when they're doing their student teaching, if they're looking at the evaluations that they're going to have in the following year when they're in their classroom, that's a part of their evaluations when they're in their prep program, right? So it's really drawing that connection a lot more, and it's including kind of, I think you need to look at, okay, here are all the skills we know our educators in our state need to have, which then also drives back to the conversation of your state needs to be a part of that process of what are the standards, reviewing the standards, and kind of that approval piece of it.
Heather.
Just one quick remark. When my daughter was a child, she used to play school a lot. We still in our family describe our shagwells, which is our schedule. So, like the family shagwell is based on my child playing school. But in any event, I think the question of how can we use AI productively to help prepare teachers for scenarios that they will encounter is also a really critical question. And around the question about data literacy and teacher preparation, I think this also gets into the subject of strategic staffing and roles for teachers. Like, I don't think we need to prepare every single teacher going into teaching to be like the data literate person, because it may be that, like, actually there's one person who should do that and then work with the rest of the team. So I think we need to, like, I think the heart of that question was about like reinventing and reimagining the structures and roles of teaching. And then how do we prepare teachers to assume some of those different roles that exist, which may also help with our recruitment and also with our retention of teachers.
Great. All right. First of all, thank you so much for your extraordinary insight in general. Thank you for your service, your expertise, what you've offered today. Please join me in giving our panel just a huge round of applause.